In this video, I want to explain Excel VBA classes and objects and object orientation. So what I'm going to do is go through class modules from a simple example all the way up to a more complex example. And even if you're a beginner to classes, there's a very good chance that you're going to come away from this video understanding how to build classes. So I'm just going to click Save As if I have that option, and I'm going to call this class example, and it's going to be a macro workbook, and save. So what we got to do is we got to set up our initial modules. So we're going to set up a standard module because a class is an object. A class is a blueprint of an object. It's almost like if you imagine a blueprint of a particular car, say, I don't know, the BMW 325, and then from that plan, they make 20, 30, 100 cars that are all the same based on the blueprint. That's what a class is. That's what a class module is. And in other programming languages, they're just called classes, but in VBA, we call them class modules. And that's what you do. We're going to be creating a blueprint to various objects. You may want to ask, why would you ever possibly want to create classes? Well, paradoxically, classes make programming simpler. Once you get on top of doing this, your code will be a lot easier to read and you will have a much easier time programming, because what you do with a class is you hide complexity. So if there's any one thing that you need doing, and if it's complicated, you solve the complicated code once, wrap it in a class, and you just call the class from there on in. You may say, well, can't you do that with functions? Yes, you can, but classes allow you to do a lot more interesting stuff as well. So they have all the benefits of wrapping things into functions, but plus more. So let's just create the class and a lot of this stuff will become evident to you. We've added a basic module. Now let's add a class. So what we're going to do is we're going to model some people very simply. This will give you a particularly easy idea of what a class is about. So insert class, and we're going to call this class person. So we're just going to say CLS person. This class is going to be very simple. It's going to have a first name, a last name, a date of birth, and we're going to have a method. So first name, last name, and date of birth are properties. So they are like properties in classes are the same as variables or the same as adjectives in English. And functions in classes are called methods, and they're the same as verbs in English. Now I'm going to show you two ways of creating a property. So let's do first name one way. So public this is the most simple way to create a property of a class. It's not usually the most recommended way, but for speed it can be effective. Now if you want a more secure way of creating a property, we're going to do that. So the way to do that is, first of all, we create a hidden variable in the class. So private MSZ, M for module level, SZ for string, last name as string. And now we're going to set the value of the last name. So that's going to be public property let last name, and passing a variable in for the last name. So this is going to be how the user of the class sets the last name. We put in the last name variable, and we're going to say last name is equal to SZ last name. So what we've got right now is a write-only property. The user of the class can set the last name, but they can't read the last name. Now for the user of the class to be able to read the last name, we need to do public property get last name as string. we get the module level variable, bring it down here and say last name. So let's go through this simple part first in detail so you understand what's going on. So we're now going to go back to the module. I'm going to do sub test and I'm going to test a few variables. So let's create dim OA as class person, dim OB as class person, set OA equals new class person, set OB equals new class person. So OA, now this is a useful element of classes you get in IntelliSense. OA.firstName equals Bill and OA.lastName equals Blogs. And OB.firstName equals and OB.lastName, let's say Smith, because I'm not feeling very imaginative right now because it's getting late and I'm getting tired. Okay, so let's go through this code. I'm going to press F8 to step through, and that's another useful thing when you're coding in VBA. I most of the time code in edit mode because then I can see what's going on a lot easier. So let's go into OA. So we've set the first name to Bill. First of all, let's expand our variables. It's very useful to have the locals window open because it makes things a lot clearer. So here's our OA variable. We've got first name set to Bill, and here's our OB variable. So what you can see is we have created a class which is just one piece of code here, but when you look at the locals window, you can see that that one piece of code has managed to generate two different variables. So going back to here, so if I now go over blogs, what you notice in this instance was the first time when I set the first name, the code did not jump into the class because it was simple. It was just setting a variable. But here now for the last name, we're using the property let and the property get. So let, if we look, we set last name to blogs. So if we go back to the module here, we've said last name equals blogs, but what's actually happening is blogs is being passed in via this variable here, which is an argument. But you will notice that the module level variable is blank. We're now going to set the module level variable of last name to blogs, and so you can see now this module level variable holds the name blogs. What this means is these variables will hold values for the lifetime of the class, which becomes quite powerful later on as we get into this in more detail. Now let's test something. Let's go to the immediate window and I'm going to type OA.lastName, and it tells me the last name is blogs. One of the positive things with using property let and property get procedures is that I can make the last name read only if we want by just taking away this, or I can make it write only by removing that. So let's go back now to our other module and set Henry Smith. So if we go F8, so first name again, Henry has appeared here, and last name, it's been checked via the property let. Now the other thing about property lets and gets is you could put a lot of validation code or a lot of other stuff in there as well, depending on how complex things are. Always get into the habit of using the locals window because it's extremely useful. Okay, so now you've seen that we have one module and it's created two objects. Let's make this a little bit more complex now. So let's go to class person and we're going to say set date of birth. I'm going to do public date of birth as public function get age as long. So get age equals cdate now minus date of birth, and I want to wrap that in an int function because I'm not interested in 17.7 years old or 28.9 years old. I want 27, 28, 52, whatever. So the int function will truncate the value, and what I need to do to make this work is divide the date now minus the date of birth by 365. And I'm not going to worry about leap years because this is just a quick and dirty, as it were. Okay, so let's see how things work now. So now we've got our properties and we've got a method. So now what we've got is no other construct can do this, because what you're doing is you're packaging data together with functions. OA.dateOfBirth equals, let's put a date here. I get very concerned about dates because in the US and presumably some other places you do month, day, year, whereas the rest of the world does day, month, year. So if you're doing the 5th of January, there can sometimes be confusion between the 1st of May and the 5th of January. So I like to put dates in long format. So what I'm going to put here is the 3rd of May 1981, and I'm going to type debug.print oa.getAge, and for Henry Smith I'll say ob.dateOfBirth equals 18th of May, and let's say 1995. Debug.print ob.getAge. Okay, so let's actually test this now. So again, F8 to go into debug mode, run over it. Bill has been filled in and blogs has been filled in. I've just pressed Shift F8 to step over the code for speed. Now let's go into the date. So the date's been set, and now let's look at the getAge function. So if we look at the locals window again, you can see that the date of birth, first name and last name are taking up memory, but what's happening is the class is sharing the function, but yet the function is working with the class. So my point is, if you imagine computer memory as a sort of a ladder of spaces, this is one memory address, this is another memory address, this is another memory address. The class, this me being the class we're in, is taking up one section of memory. The function is attached to the class, but it's not taking up memory, but it's available to the class. So if we press, and it's calculating on the internal data in the class. So you can see the getAge here is 43 and Bill Blogs is 43. And if we do Henry Smith is 29. Let's look at this another way. Let's say ob.firstname, let's change Henry to Paul equals Paul. I can query it, ob.firstname Paul. So it's changed. Now another place where classes are useful is if you've got say 20 or 30 pieces of data you want to pass to a function. Well, you can pass, instead of having to pass 20 or 30 arguments, in this particular instance you would just pass OB. And what makes that extra useful is it enables you with your programming to do something that's called decoupling. It means you can make your programs very modular, because when you've got objects, it's one object talking to another object, and what that means is you don't have spaghetti code. It's very easy to make changes. So for example, if you want to add on a new feature, you can add on another property or method to the class, and the next version of the code can make use of that, but the previous version doesn't have to. So when you're doing object orientation, you don't break stuff as easily. Let's go through a worked example where this can get even more interesting. Imagine this is a fictional camera store. So we've got a quantity, we've got various cameras, some Sonys, some Canons, Panasonic, and a lens 85mm f1.4 lens, etc. 14 of these in stock, $1,798. The Sony a7 IV, $2,498. Okay, let's use object orientation to manage this stock. So I've already written some code because you don't want to see me getting tongue twisted as I'm trying to type code and talk to you at the same time. So let's have a look at this. So in a more complicated version of this, you would add and sell items. We're just going to look at some object-oriented code that enables us to load up all of this data, find any particular object via either the product code or its name, get the value of these. So what I mean is, if we I don't want to do it in the spread, I'll do it in the spreadsheet as a test. So the value of stock on hand of the Canon R5 would be 15 times the sale price. So in this instance, we've got $58,000 worth of Canon R5s, and we have, that's the total value of these. But we're talking about modeling a more complex system where we're not going to be using a spreadsheet, but for the purposes of this, we can use this to verify what's going on. So we've got over $250,000 worth of camera stock in this fictional store, and we're going to use object orientation to get similar kind of answers to this. So here we've got a class to represent this stock data. I've created a module level variable to hold the name of the stock. I've created a long numeric variable to hold the quantity of the stock, and I've created a sale price variable as currency, module level C for currency, sale price, which will grab the sale price of the stock. Okay, so, and I've given you examples here of properties using let and get, and the product ID without a let and get. There's a property of get to calculate the value on hand of the stock, but it's read only. Why is it read only? Because it's a property get, but it does not have the property let. So that means it has to be calculated internally. The code that calls value on hand cannot set the value on hand. We don't want that to happen because it could result in a mistake, and we don't want mistakes. So therefore, value on hand is read only. So if I were to select the Sigma 24 to 70 f2.8 and I want the data on that, let's press F8 and go through it. So first of all, we're getting a range data, and it's useful for you to see me use the immediate window again. We've created a range data variable, which will be this. So you can see it's selected there. And I'm checking to see if there's more than one row, because if there's no data, it would just show one row, but we have data. You can figure this out, range data.rows.count, or look at some of my other VBA videos and you'll understand that. And now, given that there's more than one row, we want to just have a range reference to the data. So if I do range data.select, you can see that the header is no longer selected. I kind of messed up because I selected it here to show you, but I've lost my selection. So let's select the Sigma 24 to 70 again. And so now I'm saying range select is selection.entire row. So the selection is going to be where my cell is, A5. So if I just press over that, and so we have a range select. If I do range, if I just show you how that's worked out, because I've used the VBA intersect function, you can see that's what's selected. Now we're going to initialize our object, set oProduct, oProd for oProduct equals new product. I have got a variable called vData, for V for variant, data as variant. This is going to be an array. Range select.value, which is row A5 through D5. The data there is going to be written into this variable. So if we look here in the locals window, the vData value is empty. When I code over it, now it's populated, and vData contains this particular data. When you write range data into a variant array, it becomes a one-based array, and it's a fast way of exchanging data. I'm just going to show you in the immediate window, oprod, press the period sign, you get to see all of its properties and its methods. So what's happening here is we're setting the properties from the vData variant. Product name is blank, but it's going to become sigma 24 to 70, and the quantity is going to be 20, and the price is going to be 10.99. So let's just set these now. Product ID has been set. Product name is sigma 24 to 70 f2.8, and we're assigning that name to the module variable. Let's just open this up so you can see it. We've set the product ID, but now you're going to see the product name variable, which is MSZ name. This being a private variable is going to be set. So there it's set. Okay. And now we're going to set the food quantity, which is going to be 20. We go into the property let. Quantity is 20. Let's open up the object again. So we see quantity, the private variable for quantity, is going to be 20. Price similarly is going to be passed in as 10.99. So now you can see we've got an object and all the data has been filled into it. And if we now, but in this instance now, what we're going to do is we are going to call, if we look at oprod, it's got a value on hand. That's quite interesting actually. So if we look at class item, value on hand, when you look at the variable, it's calculating it for us. So this value on hand here, the value you're getting there is based on this particular calculation. So value on hand does not actually exist as a property, but because we're viewing this from outside of the class, you can see the value. So watch, this is an interesting experiment. Let's go into the class, and if I expand it now, so you can see value on hand is 21,980, which is the same as this calculation, but I'm surprised that it calculated it before the code was run. So yeah, 21,980. And just to prove that it's actually calculating it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mess with the code. I'm going to do times 1,000 here, and we're going to do this again. So main. So we're going to open up oprod, got our value on hand variable there. So let's see at what point does we put in our quantity, but as soon as we put in our price, our value on hand gets adjusted, even though it's not yet called. That's an example of the power of classes. So we're going to go into this, but I'm going to fix that value on hand now. And now the value on hand has been corrected. So that's an example of how the class integrates functions and data at the same time. Let's go to the more complex example and more realistic example. So in the earlier example, the oprod item was just able to manage one object at a time. But how do you deal with, we want one class to deal with multiple items, and that's where we use collections, and this is where it gets very powerful, and you can in fact end up making your own object model. In this example, we continue to use class item. We go one step further. We create another class and we call it class items. Now this is similar to what goes on in object orientation in general. For example, if you look at Excel, you have within Excel you have multiple sheets. You've got a worksheet object, and then you have a worksheets object, and the worksheets object manages the worksheets. It's the same with workbooks. You can have one workbook, but then you can have a workbooks collection. So what we're going to do here is we've created another class called class items. And the essential element of class items is you create a collection object at the top called private. In my instance, I've called it mcol items, but it's basically a collection. So the purpose of class items is to manage multiple items. Okay, so we've got a subroutine called load items, purpose of which is to load all this data. We've then got another property get find item by name and find item by ID, and then get total value of stock. So you can add on more functions as you go, but this one basically gets this particular value. Okay, now the easiest way for me to explain this is to just step through the code. So step one is I created a variable called dim ostock as class items. So this is the collection class representing all of the items in stock, and this is the class that manages class item. So dim o product as class item. So these are the individual line items, and this is the object that's going to manage each of these line item objects. We create our manager, as it were, or stock, and now we're going to load the items. So let's step through that code. The purpose of this items loaded variable is we only want to load items once. So it does a check to see if items have been loaded. The way it does that is items loaded is set to false. Once it's gone through and loaded everything, it sets it to true. Because this is a module level variable, it holds state as long as the class is running. So once we set this to true, it stays true, and it's like a ratchet, it can't go back to false. Just so you understand what I'm talking about, range data.current region.select is that. So given rows are greater than 1, we want to subtract 1 row because we don't want the product header here, but we do want the other data. So we subtract 1 row from rows. So rows now goes down to 10, and we need to offset and resize the range. So I'm going to go over that, and just so you see what's happened. So range data.select, that's a new range. So the header is excluded. So now we have our vdata value. We're going to write that data into the variable. Vdata is now populated, and each of these rows in the array is going to be sucked up into the objects. So we're now going to initialize this collection variable, and we're going to iterate over the vdata array. So set o item equals new class item. So this is the class that handles the individual product lines. So o item.product ID. So if we I just close this so you know what the variant array looks like. But if we look at o item, we've got our price, product ID, product name, quantity, and value on hand. But just to verify that these variables here are actually private, so currency, sale price, quantity, and name. If I type o item into the immediate window and press the period sign, you will notice that you see price, product ID, product name, quantity, and value on hand, but you do not see sale price, quantity, or name, because they are declared as private variables. Because they're private, you can't see them. Okay, so let's set these variables now. We set each of them. You can see that they've been set there. But now if we look at mcol items, and that again is the collection at the top of the class, and we look at under the me variable, we look at mcol items, it's got nothing there at the moment, but now we're going to add it to the collection. So we add it to the collection. mcol items has one item, and it's the Canon EOS R5 with all of that particular data, and in fact the value on hand for the Canon EOS R5 of $58,000 has been calculated based on the function that's in the class. That individual line item class has been passed into the collection, and here is the item here. Now we're going to set this class to nothing. We're going to wipe the class because we want to reuse it for the next row. Notice when I press F8 here that this O item effectively clears. So O item has been set to nothing, the variable is dead. But now we're going to set it to a new, so O item is a class, but it's not initialized to anything. So now I've reinitialized it with this line here, so it's empty again, but now we're going to fill it up with values, and we're going to add it to the collection. And if we look at me mcol item, we've got two items here. Okay, now the thing with these items is they don't have IntelliSense yet, but they will have. So for example, if because I'm inside the class, if I type mcol items dot, you see I don't get the IntelliSense, but if I go look in the locals window, in programming, looking at the variables window is so important. It gives you so much information. So let's, for example, look at product name. So item 1, item 2. So item 2 dot product name is a Nikon Z6 II. So watch this. mcol items, if I just type 2 dot product name Nikon Z6 II, Nikon in the States, Nikon in the UK. Thing is, you don't have IntelliSense yet. So let's just run that loop and let everything load. So everything's loaded. We've got all the data sucked up from the spreadsheet. You can see mcol items here. Now we're going to hit items loaded equals true. So now the ratchet has been set. This code cannot run again while this class is active. But let's have a look at something else here. So if you want to query your stock, what we do now is we've created a property called public property get find item by ID. You can pass in a product ID, and we're going to go through the code in a second, and or you can find item by name, where you pass in the exact name. Notice what it's going to do is it's going to do a search via looping. It's going to find the call item that relates to what's been searched for. So for example, if we want to do find item by name, if we look at this call items collection, it's going to loop over each of these product names, and when it gets a match, it's going to return that item. But it's going to return that item as class item. And because it returns it as class item, you then get IntelliSense. This will become apparent when you actually try this. And I'll make this spreadsheet downloadable so you can actually go through it. I'll probably put a link in the either a pinned comment or the description. And what you can do is go to my website, put in your email, and it'll get emailed automatically to you. So and then you can experiment with it to your heart's content. So I'm going to stop the code here, and I'm going to add another property to the items class, and you can see we do it in real time. So public property get number of items as long. So I'm now going to type number of items equals mcall items dot count. Okay, so let's go back to this other code now. Debug.print o stock dot number of items. So let's just change that. Shift F2 to go in. Number of product lines, I'm going to call that. And I'm going to change the return value to number of product lines. And if I do alt debug compile, it'll throw an error and take me to the line I need to change. This is a good way to sometimes find an error. Okay, Control V, number of product lines. So let's F8 through this. Oops. O stock dot number of product lines. Let's F8 through it, and I'm not going to go through it in detail. New class item, load items, we've done that. So now I can just F8 over this. So number of product lines is 10. We've got 10 product lines. Let's get a particular product. Let's have a look at our stuff. Let's say I want to look up this product code. What does this product code relate to? So I can do, let's do it in the immediate window. Get into the habit of using the immediate window. What we want is we want to see a particular product, but we're going to go via the stock, via the collection class. So O stock dot find item by ID, and I'm going to put in the product ID. So because find item by ID is returning a data type of class item, we get IntelliSense. So if I press dot, we get the IntelliSense of the item class. So I can say find item by ID. The ID is CAM004. What's the product name of that? Fujifilm X-T4. Now, to avoid confusion, let's do it via stepping into it so you can see what's going on. So if I put a breakpoint here on find product by ID, let's do it again. When I press enter, we'll go into the code. So I've passed in CAM004 as the product ID. For clarity, there's CAM004, which is a Fuji X-T4, 18 items on stock, sale price of 1699, and we're going to calculate this value of 13599. So let's go back. So the product ID is CAM004. We go F8 over it. I'm switching it to lowercase because I want it to be case insensitive. So we're going to switch the data to lowercase as well, and when we compare lowercase against lowercase, then we'll get a match. So for example, if somebody were to type in stuff in uppercase, it's still going to get switched to lowercase, so we get a match. So we've got 10 items, so it's now going to loop, it's going to get a reference to item number 1 in call items. It's going to check the product. So item number 1 has a product ID of CAM001, but we're looking for CAM004, so that's going to get ignored. And we're going to go over again, and we're at CAM004, and we've got CAM003, so that's going to get ignored. But now it's checking item number 4. Let's have a look at item number 4 in the immediate window, or item dot product name. Oh, Sigma 24 to 70. So O item dot product ID. Okay, so that's not the one either. So the Sigma 24 to 70 f2.8 has a product ID of len 001. You know, this is useful. That's not going to be the one either, and we will eventually get down there. So now we've found it. So O item, so our product ID of CAM004 has found, has found the Fujifilm X-T4 with a product ID of CAM004, a price, oops, I need to put in the question mark, sorry, and the price of $16.99. $16.99. Okay, so we've got our O item variable, and we're going to set it to the return value of this, which is class item. So we return that. So now the variable O item has gone into find item via ID, and it's returning that. And we go F8, exit 4, and so now we're getting the product name. So what's happening here is this is called chaining. You see, this may seem complicated to you, but what we've actually done here is we have done something quite complicated. And if you get a grip on this, your programming can become very powerful, because once you get over this complexity, you end up writing code that's easy to read, because what you're effectively doing with a class is, if we go into the class here, you get to hide a lot of complexity. So depending on what you're doing, you might have 100 lines of code or 50 lines of code of complexity just for a simple English speaking task. But when you're calling it from the client code, and in this instance main here is the client code. So for example, ostock.load items, the load items command is hiding all of this code. So all of this particular code here is part of load items. But when you build classes, you get to reuse this all the time. So all you really are interested in is load items, and you have faith that all of this does what it needs to do. So for example, when I'm learning a new language or whatever, I try and use classes as much as possible, because then you can effectively write your own programming language when you're using classes, because you learn some difficult stuff once and then either wrap it in a function or wrap it in a class, and from there on in you just call your custom function to do this same thing that you tend to do over and over. Okay, so let's just go through this once more from a different angle. We've loaded all our items, so let's see what we can do with this object model. So ostock dot find item by name, and to do that I'm just going to copy this out, Control C, and let's just go back to that. Find item by name, oops, I need to get out of edit mode, and I'm going to put in double quotes, Control V, Sony A7 IV. So Sony A7 IV. Now this is called chaining, where I do ostock.find item by name, and I put a period here, and I say I want to know what's the quantity we have on stock. I want to know what's the quantity we have on stock of the Sony A7 IV. It's 12. So this is chaining, where I go, so here I'm accessing the collection class items, and class items dot find item by name. What I've highlighted here is effectively the class item. So this here is returning, what I've highlighted in blue returns class item. So this is the object relating to the class items, and then within class items I find a particular item, and the data type of what's highlighted here is now the item. So let me prove this another way. So let's say set oProduct equals oProduct find items by name Sony A7 IV. So this is the collection class, this finds the object, and we've returned it to oProduct. So watch this. oProduct dot price, oProduct dot name Sony A7 IV, oProduct dot quantity O product dot value on hand is 29667. Now what I've done there is I've assigned the results of this to an object O product, which is the Sony a7 IV. Well, let's now get a Panasonic Lumix via CAM005, but this time using chaining. And to do chaining, I'm just going to do it from the immediate window. You could, well, let's just show you, you can do it here as well. Debug.print equals O stock dot find item by ID, and we'll put in a quote, the ID, and close it. And now to chain dot product name, because I don't particularly want to do a lot of typing. So product name dot product ID, because we know the product ID, but just to prove it is the right product ID, dot quantity dot price and dot value on hand. And let's just step through this, and you can see it's a Panasonic Lumix S5 for CAM005. Product ID is CAM005. Quantity on hand is 9. The price is 1997, and the value on hand is 17981. If you've worked through this video, put any questions you've got in the comments. Maybe I can do some more videos based on that. Let's see where this takes us.